So here's some questions that you guys have asked. I'm finally getting a chance to answer them. Nerd Nation. Okay, so today I got a list of questions that you guys have been asking, and I'm finally getting to the point where I am getting to them to answer them. This is something that I like to do is when you guys send me a bunch of questions, I'll start collecting them, and then eventually I will get to it where I can set about and answer a bunch of them all at once. So keep sending those questions, and we will keep having these Q&A sessions. Okay, first question. Tell us about ACADIA. Set the scene. So ACADIA is a futuristic society. It's on Earth. It's set in the future about 250 years. Everyone left alive lives in the last bastion of humanity, which is ACADIA. It's a city surrounded by a wall, and around that wall is a vicious horde of creatures that have no other desire than to wipe out all of humanity. So it is that scene that we find ourselves in ACADIA. Since the situation is so dire for the Acadians, they live in pretty austere and harsh conditions. They have a warrior society built off of merit. So that is ACADIA. All right, so next question. Every book starts somewhere, a moment, an image, a frustration, a dream. What was the seed for ACADIA? So ACADIA was very specifically started way back when I used to be in law enforcement. So when I started in law enforcement, your badge number dictated the rights that you received. So if you were very senior, you got the new car, you got the new gear, you got all this advantages. You could go to the advanced trainings. And if you were junior, well, you just had to wait your time. And you would, if you're junior, you had a very high badge number versus a low badge number. So at night, when I was on midnight shift and just kind of working the beat, I was just wondering to myself, how could you have a more fair system? Because I was someone that was very proactive. I was making cases. I was making good investigations, right? And I thought, well, how could it be more fair that I or someone could get more what they need to conduct those investigations? And I came up with this idea for a meritocracy, right? So basically, what you contribute to the group or society is it is in return what you get as a level of rights, right? So if you contribute a lot, you get a lot more. You get preferential treatment. So in ACADIA, your sacred score, right? So they wear a placard on their chest that has their sacred score. And basically anyone and everyone can see what their rank is in society at any given moment. It's just right there, right? And this dictates every facet of life, who you can, how you can present yourself, who you can approach, how you can approach them, your food choice, what position you are in the battlefield. Like if you have a low score number, you're going to be put in more dangerous situations, right? And every single facet of life. So obviously, it's kind of odd in a sense, because in a sense, this is the most fair system that could possibly exist, right? Fair in the sense that everyone's on the same playing field. Here are the rules, and you get exactly what you have earned. But as I took that idea to an extreme and pushed it further and further, I began to see a very sinister society develop, right? And that is the seeds for ACADIA. For example, so it's fair in the sense that everyone gets the same opportunity, but then who defined what are the parameters for what makes a human being worthwhile, valuable, successful, right? So it's a warrior-led society, and so those parameters are basically built around a warrior's ethos. But wonder if that's not necessarily for you. Well, in their society, they need those kind of individuals, and so that's how this meritocracy develops around that ethos of warriors. Anyway, it was a lot of fun to develop that society. All right, next question comes from World and Lore. The creatures in ACADIA feel like they belong to that world, not just obstacles for characters to fight through, but living pieces of an ecosystem. When you were building out the fauna of ACADIA, how intentional was the process? So the process was very intentional at first. I thought, what is the scariest kind of creature that I wouldn't want to face if I'm surrounded by this horde of creatures, right? The first basic creature I came up with was the Reaver. The Reaver is got pincers. It's disgusting. It's slimy. It's got these thorny legs that can poke or stab you. And one of the biggest scary things about it is there are so many of them. There are billions of these roaches that are running around, these reavers, right? So then I started out from there and then started building it out. So it created several different types of reavers, right, with different functions that they have in the battlefield. And then I got to the idea of like, well, what's even scarier than that? What's scarier than that? And then I finally developed the idea for the Satanicons, right? So the Satanicons are the siege breakers, right? They break walls, shields, and they break morale. They are just massive behemoths that have hundreds of legs on them, that each in their own right is like a dagger, kind of a centipede mix with a massive fangs and chompers. And there's different variants of Satanicons as well, right? So I absolutely love building out um, the the setting of the worlds that I build, right? And the creatures in this one play a major part. And so it was a lot of fun for me to build this out a little bit more. Okay, next question. The Greek influenced aesthetic of Acadia feels distinct from most sci fi settings. What drew you to blend ancient mythology with a futuristic world? So that was very intentional. One of the main inspirations behind this story, apart from the meritocracy, is the idea of the 300, right? So the 300 Spartans going to Thermopylae, led by Leonidas. When I first heard that story, and that was before I saw the movie 300, when I first heard that story, I was just blown away because they were facing, I think it was some crazy amount, like 150,000 warriors, Persians. And now, to be fair, it wasn't just 300 Spartans. There was also several thousand people from different Greek city states, but there was 300 Spartans, right? And I thought that was such an amazing story of sacrifice and and just bravery, just sheer. And I thought to myself, well, what sort of person, society, um, can live in that kind of warrior ethos that they're so willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of their collective society, right? Also, in the Spartan culture, you have the agoge, which is very similar to the Megiddo, which I have in Acadia, and that similarity is all intentional, right? Agoge is the rigorous training society that the Spartans have, and when they start at age 7, they go through this somewhat ritualistic at times, but very intense training regimen, right? And that's the same thing that goes on with the Acadians in the society. So the idea of creating a strong warrior caste, I wanted to draw upon those Greek elements, right? But then infuse them with greater technology and power. I needed to give the Acadians kind of a leg up, right? When you see the swarm of creatures and roaches that are facing humanity, I was like, we need these Acadians need a little bit more firepower. So they've imbued the armor that looks ancient but is imbued with greater technology, such as the arc blade, which is so powerful it can create a thin, superheated ionic plasma so potent that it can actually slice through steel. And also, you got your static armor that has a shield generation around it, as well as a repulse shield, right? So those things were very intentional. All right. The static shield draws from the warrior's own body. That's a brutal cost for protection. What were you trying to say about sacrifice and power with that mechanic? And I wouldn't say I was trying to say necessarily anything intentional about that mechanic, although it does create some really cool, memorable moments where people are literally sacrificing uh, damage to their shields in order to protect someone else, right? So it does create a really interesting dynamic. But honestly, kind of going back to what I said in the last question, Canadians, they're kind of in need of help, right? needed a boost of technology in order for them to survive as long as they have. So, but it was super fun creating the static armor, the repulse shield, the static helmet, how these things all interconnect. And you can learn a lot about that from the lore book, ACADIA Field Manual, which is out there. All right, next question. The hitting the wall shutdown mechanic feels almost athletic, like a fighter gassing out. Was that a deliberate nod to real human physical limits? Um, yeah, that certainly was, right. So when you hit the wall as an Acadian, it's when your static armor. So looking at this guy up here, it's when his static armor powers down because you've gassed out all of your electrical, your battery power for your armor, and that's when you are completely vulnerable. And in a real sense, it's like being gassed out. And not only is your armor down, but you yourself become physically tired. So it definitely is a nod to real human physical limits. Okay. Acadia draws comparisons to Red Rising and Ender's Game, heavy hitters. Do you feel that pressure or does it energize you? That's a great question, actually. Honestly, a little bit of both, right? So these are sci-fi giants in their own realm. Ender's Game, I kind of think did such a remarkable job of expanding its audience, right? Prior to Ender's Game, it seemed like a lot of sci-fi books were really niche, kind of a little bit more Dune, right? You either love it or you hate it. But I think Ender's Game, because it had such compelling situations, such compelling characters, I think it broadened the audience for sci-fi. And I think everyone started realizing, oh, you can have um, really good characters, really good plot. It just so happens to be a sci-fi, or it happens to be, whatever genre. In this case, Ender's Game is a sci-fi fiction, and that paved the way for a lot of new readers. Oh, in um, United States, you have like 90 million sci-fi fans out there, which is tremendous. It used to not be like that, not too far ago, or not too long ago. And then also Red Rising pioneered even more so. So Red Rising even expanded that horizon even more. I'm actually really surprised at how many individuals that just never read a sci-fi book before really ate up the Red Rising world, right? So that is a lot of pressure. I mean, that the biggest comparative that I get out there is people are like, oh, this is like Red Rising. And I would say, very much so that it is like in the same DNA as Red Rising. It's its own story, of course. But Red Rising has very successfully assimilated a much bigger, wider audience, whereas mine is, more Acadia is more like niche in the idea that it's militaristic, it's action packed. Of course, Red Rising is action packed, but it is a little bit different feel to it. So yes, it does energize me to be compared to such fantastic books. Yeah, it's great. Never going to say no to that. All right, next question. The weighted class system seems to carry a lot of social weight beyond just combat. How much of the hierarchy is commentary versus just world flavor? Well, I think there's a lot of parallels that you could draw. And this is a question we could spend a lot of time discussing, right? So I do like having strong themes in my book. Freedom versus captivity, redemption arcs. I like justice, injustice. I like those moments where you have a rebellion that's completely justified, or a system that is just so unfair, right? Not over the top unfair, but it is so visceral that you just can't help but root for the downfall of that system, right? And in Acadia, we have the weighted class. Individuals that have that their placard on their chest, their score, um, is starting to diminish and is starting to decrease. They're weighted, they're falling in society, their standing is falling. They might have once been a great warrior, but for whatever reason, they might have been injured or something. They're not able to do the physical rigors of battle anymore. Whatever reason, their score is starting to fall. And at some point, it can be so traumatic that individuals it's called going blind, where they just pretty much give up on anything. Their mind almost goes blank, and they are just sitting there. Their body is still functional, but their mind just checks out, right? Um, so I do think that there are some definite parallels in my writing, since the best writing often reflects truth or has strong elements of truth within it. I think those things really resonate with readers because unfairness and those sort of elements are seen all throughout our society. So not anything intentional, but it is something that is definitely resonant throughout my writing. Okay. Which character surprised you the most as you wrote them? Someone that became more original, or someone who became more than you originally planned? Easily, Orch, or Chuli, right? So he was a fun character to write. Initially, he was just a peripheral character. He was a magister in the Megiddo, and he had such a quirky personality that he just kept bleeding into chapters, right? And I'm a very structural writer, right? I really plan out chapters, books. I've already got the whole series for Acadia planned out, for Nickel Brickleby planned out. So I was really surprised that Orch just started popping up in odd moments, which is a lot of fun. As these books, these characters kind of develop their own personality at some point. It's very interesting. Not all characters, but Orchuli certainly did. And then also Shamway Darkfiend in Nickel Brickleby. He just is his own person. Some had classified Acadia. Next question. Some had classified Acadia as YA. Do you agree with it? So I purposely write my books so that they are accessible to YA audiences. In Acadia, there is some pretty intense action and violence. I would say 14 and above. I purposely don't put in swear words, and I also don't put in inappropriate or content that, like romantic content, that wouldn't be suitable for a YA audience. But I don't necessarily put Acadia in that box, right? I think it has wide appeal. I really try to use themes that are larger than life. The idea of freedom and rebellion and liberty and justice and a system that is very fleshed out and real. So I would very much say that so the characters too, Kojak's, Jessica, they start the book as being 16. But that's definitely not where they're going to end up in the subsequent books. This is kind of their origin story, and it's going to continue on. So I wouldn't necessarily put it in the box of YA, but it is accessible for that particular age group. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys. I'll stop it right here. I'll probably do a part 2, but please keep your questions coming. This is a lot of fun for me to talk about these things and engage directly with your questions. And anyway, you guys have a good one. Talk to you later.